Honestly, this is not something that I just openly share with anybody and everybody's because it is so near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to get real vulnerable. I'm just going to share with you my story. I would say it probably started back when I was a 12-year-old girl and my parents were going through a divorce. This pretty nasty divorce. And I made a commitment to myself right then and there that I will never get a divorce.
Welcome to the Grace for the Growth podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Leo. The goal of this podcast is to encourage you on your own growth journey by empowering you to live your life with authenticity, freedom, and confidence. We will get real and raw as we dive into honest conversations about life, faith, business, relationships, dating, healing, and so much more. My goal is that you would walk away from our time together feeling a little less alone, a little less crazy, and a little more brave to be yourself. I hope you will find yourself more compassionate to past you, challenged as present you, and excited for future you. Embrace the story, welcome the messy of it all, sit in the unknown, and most importantly, live authentically. So pull up a chair in my virtual living room and let's dive into today's conversation. Y'all, I am so excited for today's episode. My sweet friend Jodeen is here to share with us her story, what God has been teaching in her life. And I just know that every conversation I've had with you, Jodeen, has just been full of encouragement. And your story just really speaks to the steadfastness and the faithfulness of God. And so I'm excited for people to get to know you, first of all, but also be encouraged by what the Lord is doing and has been doing in your life and all of that. But before I get too far ahead of myself and those kind of things, would you just take a few moments for anybody who has not met Jodeen? Who are you? What do you do? What does life look like for Jodeen these days?
Oh my goodness. Well, hi. First of all, thank you for having me on. I'm so excited to be here. I love what you're doing out there in the world and for people. It's incredible. So yeah, I am a 48-year-old married woman. It's actually been 25 years, but if you're like, but I'm not married or I don't want to hear about marriage, hang in there because I cannot wait to share with your audience a little bit more about my story, a very broken but restored story. And I have 3 kids and I'm a business owner. I live in Oregon in the Pacific Northwest and I love the outdoors and I love family and I love a nice, simple life.
I love it. I love it so much. So you already kind of alluded to it a little bit. You've got a story and, we have all kinds of listeners who listen, but I do know that we have a huge portion of listeners here who are experiencing singleness, who are navigating singleness, those kind of things. And so I would love just to hear really just what's on your heart in regards to your story, what you've been through, what God has shown you, what God has been teaching you, what he's continuing to teach you. And we've kind of talked about it a little ahead of time before this call. So I'm trying not to get too far ahead of it for our listeners, but here we're all about embracing the messy. And I know your story is full of the messy. So would you take us as much as you want to show us, but would you take us to the moment? What has this story of marriage because looking at it okay, cool. You've got 3 kids, you've got 25 years of marriage. Okay, cool, great, awesome. Would you take us back to what has this journey and what has this story been like? And we'll kind of use that background as a catalyst for our conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And, honestly, this is not something that I just openly share with anybody and everybody's because it is so near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to get real vulnerable. I'm just going to share with you my story. And I would say it probably started back, when I was a 12-year-old girl and my parents were going through a divorce. It was actually my mom's second marriage. And my stepdad was, he raised me, but they were going through this pretty nasty divorce. And I made a commitment to myself right then and there that I will never get a divorce. I will never put my kids through that. And probably most of the people listening on here, most of us have experienced divorce, either firsthand with our own parents or, with a good friend or, other family, like our cousins, maybe they've gone through divorce and it's common. And I made that commitment to myself. I will not go through that. Then I found myself, let's see, we were about 17 years into marriage, and we were signing divorce papers. And I had to really talk to my inner child, that 12-year-old girl, and say, you didn't know what I know now. And I didn't think that I would be here now, but I'm here. And my marriage has failed. And we're signing divorce papers. And there's a lot that led up to that, obviously. But I am happy to say that our marriage was restored, but there was about 4 or 5 years of separation. And it was a difficult time. But there was a lot of small things that happened leading up to that I think most people in a relationship, whether they're married or not, they don't realize the betrayal that happens right before their eyes. If you've ever been in a conversation with somebody in the same room and you keep picking up your phone while they're talking to you, that's a form of betrayal. When you're putting something or somebody else before your partner, before whoever it is that's in the room, those little glimpses of betrayal that started to happen in our marriage. And we always made a commitment that we're going to protect each other's reputation. We're not going to be talking, we're not going to allow anybody to talk badly about each other, no matter how nasty this, what we thought divorce was going to be. And that made all the difference for us to be able to restore things down the road. Yeah, there's a lot more there, sister. I'm like, where do I begin to unpack that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, just you even bringing the story and even opening up with this, I think is really important. And so I would love to hear just how does this story play into your relationship with God? Like this journey, this adventure, were you walking with God? Were you not? Like where does God play into this story, this relationship with him? Were you walking with him? Were you mad at him? Like where does your faith lie in this timeline?
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. So a little background. Since I was a young kid, I've been very close with my Lord, with Jesus. I've always been a very spiritual human, even as a little girl. But what happened is, as I got older, I started to have success in my business. And looking back now, I see where I put that success almost as an idol in my life, where it was like that form of like betrayal to God, where my identity was wrapped up in my success. My identity was wrapped up in my title or how much money I made or what the world had to say about me versus, what God has to say about me. So it was a slow fade where I slowly began to run in front of God instead of letting him go before me. And even though I always knew he was with me and I always talked to him and I had my relationship with Jesus, I got a little ahead of him. And so my faith was there, but I wasn't growing in my faith. Like my spiritual maturity was not progressing. And I did become angry. I became frustrated because I thought that marriage would mean that I would never be alone, that I'd always have somebody in my corner, that we would always be on the same page, and then when you realize I am so lonely in my relationship and I'd almost rather be alone, single, than to be in a relationship and be lonely. And so I was kind of frustrated. I very, very frustrated for years and years. And so my faith was there, but it wasn't very strong. I was trying to just strong arm everything and do it all myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, being able to do, right? That's something that I talk a lot about is like when we have this mindset of doing, like what can I do more of? What can I step into more of? Like what are the things that I can check the boxes? Like how can I be better this, better that? And for somebody experiencing singleness, like a lot of times we look at it as, okay, what would it look like for me to do all of the right things. And then maybe if I do all the right things, then I will receive this prize of a long lasting, lifelong relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you unpack so beautifully like that frustration that comes from an
Mm-hmm.
even different perspective of circumstances, of saying, no, like I did have this marriage relationship, I did have this covenant marriage. However, there was this anger and frustration of like, why this, why that, like all of that. And so I'm curious, like you kind of talk about getting up ahead of God, but I'm curious, like, what was your frustration like with him? And like, what was that? I also want to make sure like I hold space for not just like the grief and the pain of this story, because I think that that's something that a lot of people can relate to, even though the
Mm-hmm.
circumstances might be different. But then also like, what does that turning point look like? Like, where do you feel God meeting you? Or did you like push him away in the middle of that mess, honestly?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's so interesting. I realize now how much I made, like my husband was going to be the knight in shining armor on the riding in on the
Yeah.
white horse, that he was going to be my rescuer, that he was going to fill the voids in my life that were so evident, you know, with my childhood stuff that happened with my own
Mm-hmm.
parents and not having my dad in my life the way that I really wanted to, that I really put my expectations of my husband as a human being, as a man, for him to fill a lot of those voids in my life. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was so frustrated with my husband, but yes, also with God, because like I've been so obedient, Lord. I've done everything. And honestly, like looking back to when we were very first dating and before we were married, and I was like, really, Lord? Like you want me to marry him? Like I knew I knew that he was the one he wanted me to marry, but I was still kind of going against. I guess I was kind of resisting it a little bit. And I'm just going to say, so I ended up where we were pregnant before we got married. And
Mm-hmm.
we got married, obviously, after that. But there was a lot of years where I felt that we only got married because I was pregnant. And so there's, you know, have playing house or playing like we were married before we actually were, there were some consequences to that. And for so
Yeah.
many years throughout our marriage, me just feeling like, oh, he only married me because he has to, or because he had to. And it took us after the 17 years when we were signing divorce papers, and then several years after that, for us to really get to the bottom, to the heart of where that came from. That I felt that he didn't really want to be married to me. And
Mm-hmm.
he felt very similar, that maybe I was disappointed with him, that I didn't want to be married to him. And felt
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, so we had a lot that we had to work through. It's
Yeah.
just so interesting how when you're laying that foundation in the dating years, how it does impact your marriage down the road. It, you know,
Yeah.
like you want to have those, like you look at your relationship when you're dating through a microscope, like
Mm.
every little thing, because when you get married, those things are magnified. Those
Mhm.
emotions, those feelings, the brokenness, the little things that he does that irritate you, they're magnified. So it's really,
Mhm.
really important to know truly, like, because too many people, I think for me personally, when I was dating, especially, it was just like, oh, it'll be fine, it'll work itself out. We kind of overlook some of those things that really become very big down the road.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, we
I no, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead.
We just had
um
so much brokenness that we needed to work through, that we let go for so long. And
yeah.
now we're marriage 2.0 and it's completely different. But um,
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, that's what I want to ask about next. I want to ask about, okay, so here you are, you're 17 years into marriage. You have come to the conclusion that this is not it. It sounds like there's
mm,
some resentment of each other, some questioning of why, right? You're here
mm-hmm,
at this end. What happens after that? What
mm,
happens in those years of separation, and what is the healing process that takes place in your relationship with the Lord in your separation season, and then ultimately in your healing season with your husband? Talk us through the, okay, Now we're in the pit. Now we are signing divorce papers. We're saying goodbye after 17 years. What happens next? Take us through that.
Oh boy. Yeah. Okay. Now this is, if you're listening to this right now, get ready, because this is where the depth really happens. So divorce papers were signed, but we didn't turn them in. We never turned those divorce papers in to the court systems. We co-petitioned. We did everything 50-50. And it was like, he would have the divorce papers and like, oh, we're missing a signature. And then he would sign it, but then he'd give it to me. And then like, oh, neither one of us wanted to turn in those divorce papers. So those divorce papers were never actually turned in, which is just crazy. But it was like, we were just at this place where it had been several years going back and forth between these divorce papers. Should we turn them in? Should we not? What's going on? Meanwhile, I'm just going to say it. I started seeing somebody. I was in a relationship with somebody else during those years. And my husband said, he was still legally my husband. He said, I know we're not divorced, but I understand that you're in a relationship with somebody else, and I'm not going to worry about what everybody else has to say. I want you to be happy. And even though we're not legally divorced, we understand this. I mean, because there was that, if you're not legally divorced, you're in a relationship with somebody else, you're having an affair. Like, let's just call it what it is. I was having an affair, and it was really a low point in my life, needless to say. And man, this is hard to say. I don't talk about this publicly. What happened was I ended up pregnant. And that was a really hard thing, finding out that I was pregnant with somebody else. And I didn't want it. I didn't want that. But here we are. Okay, Lord, is this the direction I'm supposed to go now? Am I supposed to be with him? I was still talking to God, even though I was not where he wanted me to be. It turned out that pregnancy was an ectopic pregnancy. And I had my tube burst one day. I was up in Portland, Oregon, downtown, busy area. And I was bleeding internally, like within seconds. I was like in excruciating pain, and I had pain going up into my left shoulder, which I knew from my physical therapy background that was referred pain from having fluid around my diaphragm. I knew I was bleeding internally, and I knew I very likely could die. And we called 911, and I had emergency surgery, and I woke up after 12 hours, and I had a breathing tube. I was, on a ventilator, and during those 12 hours, from the time they operated on me to the time that I woke up, I had a conversation with my creator. And some people may call it a near-death experience or whatever, but I didn't see the light or anything like that. But I have a very, very, very vivid experience with Jesus, where I was given a choice. Just to make the story short, I was given a choice. I was literally sitting with him at the edge of heaven. And I was given a choice. You can go back and complete the life that I have laid out for you to restore your marriage and to tell people about my graciousness and my forgiveness and who I am, or you can continue on. I mean, heaven's here. I mean, I can just see it now in my eyes. That's just off in the distance. We were sitting in this field of like iridescent, like a field of just iridescent grass. And we had a conversation without words. It was just this exchange, where just this understanding between him and I knew I needed to, I wanted to go. I wasn't ready to die. I wanted to go home. I wanted to be with my children, my 3 boys. I was fighting to stay alive, thinking of them every single step of the way. And I wanted to go home and be with their dad too. And so that was the moment I woke up in the intensive care unit, and I finally could get the breathing tube out after several hours. I don't know how long it was exactly, but the first moment that I could speak, he was in the room. And the man that I was seeing at that time was also there, and he exited the room, and my husband came into the room, and it was a very emotional moment and I said, we're not done yet. Our marriage isn't done yet. I want to restore our marriage. I want to go home with you and the boys and I want to make this work. And we were both crying. And it took a lot of work, a lot of had to happen in order for that restoration to happen. And we really, really did the deep heart work, really just each of us individually, really diving deep into who God has called each of us individually to be and growing ourselves spiritually and healing wounds from before we even met each other and finding that forgiveness and that understanding of how knowing the betrayal that happened before all of that. Like there was just glimpses of betrayal throughout our relationship. And there's other things that happen that like, I don't want to like, I feel like some of that is my husband's story to share,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But, so that's what started it. It was, I literally had to be at the brink of death to surrender. And that's what it was. It was a full surrender to Jesus and to realize that I was putting my husband as my savior. I was making him fill the voids. I was expecting him to be my knight in shining armor. And now it's so different. It's so different. And we speak this language to each other now. We're like, yeah, that didn't work before. We know that what we did before didn't. We keep going. We recognize the signs earlier on of what's broken within us that we're bringing to the table in our relationship. And like, that doesn't work. We know where that story leads. We know that when we ignore those little pieces of resentment or betrayal or loneliness within our marriage, where that leads. And we're not willing to do that again. It's a very shameful time in my life, to talk about the fact that I was in a relationship with somebody else and pregnant, and then this ectopic pregnancy, and to go through all that we went through. It was a very shameful time. But it was so necessary for us to be to where we are today. It was hard, but it was necessary.
Yeah. Yes. Jodeen, I first of all just want to honor you and just thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing your story. I know that comes with so much weight, and the things that you spoke today are some things that have only been shared within seen and known relationships. And so I'm just, first of all, before I even ask you anything else, just want to be so grateful for that. And I know that, part of the reason we've talked about this, part of the reason to even have this conversation is to encourage people that they are seen and that there is hope, and that there is hope. And so I want to kind of talk using your story as a framework now that we have walked through what was before, what was in the darkness, and the hope restored, right? Well, first tell everyone how long it's been that you guys have been in Marriage 2.0.
Oh yeah, Marriage 2.0. Well, it's 25 years total that we said I do. So it's been years that we've been that we restored this.
Yes. This is not something that happened last week. This is something that is full of bliss and joy, and all of that. So I would love to use your story as a framework and ask you a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Yes.
The first kind of question I want to talk about, you talked a lot about at the beginning of our conversation about those moments of betrayal, the moments of picking up your phone, the moments of those kind of things. And whether we're in a romantic relationship or not, we are all in relationships. And so I want to get really practical for a second. And how do we navigate those feelings and communicate those feelings of betrayal? And I maybe now, like, there's a way that you two communicate that differently. What would you say to somebody who goes, oh no, like if I'm actually, to be honest, like I am feeling betrayed by this partner, by this friend, by whoever I'm in a relationship with? How do we navigate that so it just doesn't become this place that just like eats us away over and over at time? What is that process within ourselves? And then what do we need to communicate to other people?
That's so good. I think when we understand ourselves, the more we understand who our true identity is in Jesus Christ, that we
Mm-hmm.
we understand more about what our needs are. And then we can have the words, and we can make the time to communicate our needs, and not just ignore it. I mean, so many years I just ignored the loneliness. I was just, and I was so angry. I was so frustrated for so many years. So I think really spending the quiet time with the Lord, and maybe, if somebody listening is in a season of like, well, is God even working in my life? Like, when is he going to bring somebody to me? I want so badly to be in a relationship. I want to be happy in a relationship. And I found that when I am frustrated with God's timing and like, come on, let's get this going, that
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes he's really calling me to be still and to rest in
Mm-hmm.
him and to fully surrender in him. And that's all that I know. That's what he wants. And that's what he was asking for me. And it took me to that point to be able to be literally where all I had was the energy, and that just a few moments left of my life where all I could do was just whisper Jesus and just surrender to him. But that's what he wants from us without it going to that extreme. He wants that from us every single day. And so being
Yeah.
able to really know who we are in Jesus Christ and who he calls us to be, each of us individually, and spending that time with him, that helps so much in
Mm-hmm.
expressing our needs to other people and understanding what's most important. Am I looking for another human
Mm-hmm.
to fill a void? Am I idolizing this relationship or this job title or this amount of money? Am I idolizing that and putting that before who God has called me to be? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
does that help answer
Absolutely.
your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about the idolization of marriage a lot on here,
Yeah.
because so
Mm-hmm.
many of us have navigated that and have felt that, and we're breaking down those walls and those narratives together as a community. And so I think, yeah, that bit of like, okay, actually, when I'm wanting things to move, God's actually asking me to be still with him. I
Mm-hmm.
think that is
Mm-hmm.
so huge and crucial in that sense. Um, I I think your story is absolutely incredible, and I think that whatever relationship status people are in, that there's something that they can pull and relate to it. And I love that you talk about navigating the faith journey and the faith relationship with the Lord and those kind of things. I want to go back to a moment that you had kind of alluded to and you had talked about. You talked about how you had expected your husband to be like this answer, this knight in shining white armor, like just this person to be an answer, to be a need, to be a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so what has shifted in Marriage 2.0? What has shifted? How do you view him now? And if you're speaking to somebody who either is married and has expected that from their partner,
Mm-hmm.
or someone who isn't married and who has been looking for that and expecting that, what would you say
Mm-hmm.
for that? What would you say to them? So two parts. What has shifted now? And
Mm-hmm.
then what would you advise to somebody who kind of wants to work through that mindset, maybe that they want to revamp a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to try to remember it all. But what's shifted now is I see my husband so differently, but honestly, I don't think he's changed a whole lot. It's so
Mm,
interesting how just a shift in perspective and understanding, and I appreciate things about him that I didn't even see before. He's changed in the way that he's more vulnerable with me, that we really share our
mm,
hearts with each other. But I I see the things that he's always done for me and in our marriage, there I see them in a new light now. And it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. For example, there were many years where I was so into self-development and reading all the books and going to all the things, and not necessarily spiritual growth and development, but more about self-development. When you're caught up in the business world or whatever, it's like self-development. You got to read this self-help book. And I would look at my husband like, well, you're not reading this book. And I almost looked down my nose at him, like,
mm.
well, I'm learning all this stuff. What are you reading? And it was
Yeah.
just, I look back now and like, that's so gross. Like, yuck. I don't like that at all.
Mm,
But, I mean, let's grow ourselves. Like, that's okay. Like, I'm not saying self-help is bad or anything, but when we idolize it, and then our perspective can change in a way where we're kind of looking down our nose at our spouse or somebody that we're in a relationship with, that like they're not doing enough. They're not at my level. It's just, that's a whole other topic, honestly. But I feel so appreciative of the things that he does now and who he is. And I just the other day I actually did a post on my Instagram about when we went and got Christmas trees with our kids, and just watching how he fathers our boys and how he teaches them and instructs them and how he's there and he's so present and he's so involved with our family, things that he's always done. I just see as where I was just like, literally, like, it was like my mouth was dropped open and I just fell in love with him all over again in that moment. And I'm just so proud to see the man that he's grown into, because we've known each other for so long. And it's such an honor, truly such an honor, to grow old with this man. Like, who even am I? Like, you look back in 2017, like I felt so justified in my resentment. I felt so justified in my loneliness and the betrayal that had happened, kind of, small ways, but on both sides. I felt so justified. And it just is, it's so different now. It's so different now. So, and I would say for, whether you're in a marriage now, or, you're single and maybe you're dating, or maybe you haven't found anybody yet. Maybe you're totally single, not even in a relationship right now. I would just say, expecting somebody else to be your source of happiness, you're going to get let down every single time. Every single human being out there is going to let us down. And I have let people down in the biggest ways. People who've known me my whole life, that all of a sudden, what, your marriage is falling apart and you're in a relationship with somebody, like, who are you, Jody? Like, this is not, and I understand that somebody listening to the story right now is probably pretty triggered by that, because we have all been impacted by divorce in some way, betrayal, affairs. And those are hard topics to understand unless you're in the thick of it, unless you're going through it. And I feel that God gave me that, a change in perspective, that as a Christian woman, first of all, I see divorce in a different way now. I also see betrayal and affairs in a different way. Never is it okay. But I have a different perspective on it now. And the shame that comes with it, and the condemnation that comes with it, it's hard. So, I apologize to anybody that has been triggered by it. I understand completely. I've felt the same way that you felt now, but then when I found myself in those shoes where I was still looking to another human being to fill my brokenness too, even though I was and am a Christian woman, I was still looking for another human to be my source of happiness. So that would be my encouragement now, whether you're in a marriage, honestly, as long as it's safe, you're in a marriage and you're really wanting to restore your marriage, I would just encourage you to just find the resources where you can learn more about yourself and your own brokenness, and start healing that in a way that your spouse is going to want to join in on that, rather than looking down your nose at him for not being at your level, discovering our own brokenness, and not relying on another human being to be our source of joy and happiness is so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I love about this story is it captures so much of the heart of the conversations that we have here in Grace to the Growth, of understanding that we are human and our stories are full of brokenness and broken fragments and pieces. And there's so much breakthrough that happens when we dive into the story and we welcome the messy, when we say, okay, we're going to get curious about what narratives have been placed here, what we're navigating, what pain, what harm has been done, and break free from the shame and the guilt with that. And understand that there is an opportunity here for healing. There is an opportunity here for growth. And your story shares that so much. Your story shares, hey, when we have gone through stuff, whether it's in childhood, whether it's in adulthood, whatever it is, like, there is space and there's an opportunity here for us to dive into that story, for us to dive into deep into ways that we can heal. And you're proposing this invitation to us. You're giving us this invitation of married, not married. What would it look like for us to invite God into that healing place? And if you are in a marriage, it's not hopeless, of course, as long as it's safe, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not hopeless, right? Like there is an opportunity for you to dive into your own healing journey and invite your spouse along that process. But it's about your own healing journey. It's about their healing journey. And then as singles, like the work that you are doing in this healing journey to welcome the messy, to dig up those weeds, to get honest with God and honest in community about what's going on, it makes a difference. It makes an impact. And it doesn't mean that your marriage is without flaws and it's perfect or whatever, because back to your other point, like we will be marrying a human, a imperfect, flawed human that makes mistakes, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that it will be without flaw, but what an incredible opportunity in singleness to dive into those wounds and that hurting and those kind of things in this season. And hear me when I say I don't think it is, oh, me arriving at healing, therefore I will receive the prize of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
If you've listened to me for more than 2 seconds, you know that that is not
Mm.
me. But I do think there's an opportunity here. What are we doing in the meantime as singles? I'm speaking from the single perspective myself. Like, what am I doing in the middle of this singleness? What am I doing in the middle of this season? And I don't want to waste it. I don't want to waste it. And so, what I love about the story, I've heard
Mm.
bits and pieces of it, but I even heard new things today that I haven't heard before. And so I'm really grateful for that. And as we wrap up with some final thoughts, and before we kind of let people know how to connect with you, I'm curious about. I want to ask you for two things. The first thing is for anyone who is listening, who is in a marriage and they are losing hope, or they're frustrated, or they're
Mm.
overwhelmed, and they want to let go. They're listening right now. Um, what would you say to the person in a marriage today?
Mm.
What's on your
Oh
heart?
man, I just would love, I would love to sit with that woman. I would love to just sit with
Mm-hmm.
her and just talk with her and just hug her and just like, I understand when you fall down on your knees and you're like, I can't do this anymore, God. I don't see how this marriage can go on anymore. And you don't want, no, I didn't want to sign divorce papers. That's not what I wanted. I wanted so badly to have the marriage that my 12-year-old self wanted me to have. You know, it's like you can't
Yeah.
negotiate with your 12-year-old self, but I just want to wrap my arms around you and just say, just hang in there a little bit longer. It takes time. The growth, you know, whether you're single or in a relationship, it takes time. And use this period of loneliness, this period of stillness, maybe, to just continue diving in deeper and deeper into who God is calling you to. He is beckoning you to Him. He wants you to come to
Mm.
Him, to surrender to Him first. And I just would encourage you just to do that. Take this opportunity to grow in that way. And I know what it's like to be sitting there like, but Lord, I'm depending on you. I want you to fill my every need. I'm a human being. And man, I just want somebody to wrap their arms around me. I just want to be held by a man. I know that feeling, that loneliness, and just longing for
Mm-hmm.
affection and companionship. I understand. Just hang in there because He can fill your needs. He does know the desires of your heart. And you know, when we surrender to the desires that God wants for us rather than just our earthly desires, it comes together.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. Just hang
Yeah.
in there a little bit longer and have faith, because if the ugliest of things can happen in my marriage, and it can be, there's so much sin and so much shame in there, but if we can be restored from that, you can too. I really
Mm.
do believe in the sanctity of marriage, and I believe in the restoration of marriage. And I believe that the healing that needs to happen, preferably before you even get married, it is such a gift to your future marriage and to your future
Mm-hmm.
children, if that's what God has in store for you. It is so worth it. Not that marriage is the reward necessarily, like you were saying. It's the reward is the closeness and the depth of your relationship with God. And
Yeah.
so just lean in and be patient. I know it's hard, but that's where the growth happens.
Yes. Yes. So good. My second question was going to ask you to speak to singles, but honestly, so much of what you just said, the heart of it, the message of it, the leaning in to the Lord honestly speaks, I think, to both hearts. The heart experiencing singleness and the heart experiencing loneliness in marriage. You speak to both of those hearts in that. But is there anything you would like to add to the heart experiencing singleness right now?
Yeah, I would say that the person that you are now, you're still going to be that same person in marriage. You're not going to be like completely transformed. I mean, sometimes I don't recognize myself because I'm like baking sourdough bread and I'm like homeschooling our youngest kid and like, who am I? But really, truly, you are the same whether you're married or not. It's you. You can't run away from you. Whether you're 12 years old or you're 27 years old or you're 48 years old like me, you are yourself. You're bringing you into that marriage, and the marriage isn't going to heal you. And I just, the whatever healing you can do now on your story, look back over. I mean, that's a whole other episode of really just that story work. And that's truly that when my husband and I, we dove into story work, and that is what gave us the tools to know how to speak that language to each other of like, hey, when this happens, this is how I feel, or understanding that maybe it's not him, it's still wounds from my childhood that I'm still working through. So doing that story work and really diving into, healing your soul at that soul level, because you are you, whether you're married or not, you're still going to feel like there's a part of you that's the same no matter what age you're at. So I just wanted to say that.
That's such good wisdom. Thank you. I love story work. I love story work. Changed my life. So is changing my life, I should say.
Yes.
So that's so wise. Before we close out today, if somebody is wanting to connect with you further, how can people do that? How can people connect with you? What are you doing to support people? Where do we go from here to connect more with Jodeen?
Yeah, well, you can find me on Instagram or Facebook, but on Instagram, I'm more public. So it's just Jodeen Barba. On Facebook, I do have a podcast called the Gracious Warrior Podcast, where I have been talking more and more about this very topic here about betrayal. I do talk a lot about entrepreneurship and leadership, consulting and that sort of thing. But a lot of my relationship experience is weaved in throughout there. And I have different guests and stuff on the podcast. So you can find me at either one of those places. And I'm currently shifting my coaching program into more work around relationships. So stay tuned for more of that in 2024.
I love it. I love it. I mean, of course, story work tells us that some of our greatest pains is where our callings usually blossom. And so, what an incredible gift, and what an incredible story. And I'm so thankful to have you here and your story and your vulnerability. I do not take it for granted, and I do not take it lightly. The things that you shared today, the wisdom that you shared, and I'm grateful for this framework of your story to provide such powerful encouragement and lessons through that. And so I'm just so grateful for that. Thank you for coming and sharing so vulnerably with us today.
Yes. Thank you for listening. It's not always easy to talk about, that's for sure. But I just know that, I may have a little bit of vulnerability hangover after this, but I know that there was somebody that needed to hear me being really truthful and honest about the shame that came about in the middle of our marriage. So thank you for giving me this platform, this opportunity to talk about this in hopes of helping somebody else out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was my honor. My honor. And for anyone listening, I hope that today's conversation, you're able to walk away with some encouragement and you feel a little less alone, no matter what season or what part of the story you resonated with. I think there's something that we can all pull from about staying steadfast and growing in intimacy with the Lord really impacts all relationships around us, both present and future relationships. And so my hope and my prayer, I really do believe, like what you said, I really do believe that someone has been impacted through listening to this story. I really do believe it. I really do feel it. And so I just pray for any listener that you would find the courage and the boldness to press into your relationship with the Lord, that you would find the courage to step out and to seek opportunities to grow and to develop in your own healing journey, because it has a ripple effect on every single area of your life. I pray that you would have so much joy, even in the brokenness, that you would see God's goodness and God's steadfastness and faithfulness in your life, even in the most harmful and difficult places, that He is there for you every single step of the way. And I just hope that today's conversation helps you feel a little less alone and a little more seen, not just through Jodeen's story, but also through your Heavenly Father, who loves you so, so much and who is in this journey with you. And so that wraps up our conversation today. You know where to find me. I'm always here to be a listening ear, and I would love to hear what stands out with you, what connects with you. You can connect with me on all the different ways, Instagram, email, all of that. But also feel free to connect with Jodeen. I've gotten the privilege to know her the last few months, this last season of life, and she is exactly who she sounds like she is, and just a wealth of encouragement and knowledge, and really does want to sit with people. And so we love you guys. Love you so, so much. Thank you for listening. Thanks, Jodeen, for being here, and for sharing so vulnerably. And I hope you show yourself some kindness in your vulnerability hangover. I know I will. I always need to anytime that happens. But that wraps up this episode. We will see you guys next time. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Grace for the Growth podcast with Courtney Leo. I hope that this conversation encouraged you and inspired you on your own growth journey, and as you pursue a life full of authenticity and freedom. I want to encourage you to interact with us on social media at Grace for the Growth and at Courtney Y. Leo. Also, if you've got any ideas, way that these episodes have impacted you or encouraged you, I want to invite you to either DM us or email us at hello@graceforthegrowth.com. Until next time, I challenge you to embrace your story, welcome the messy, sit in the unknown, and live authentically. Bye-bye now.